All right, here we are. Welcome, everybody. I'm Noah Horowitz, Director Americas for Art Basel. Here we are, Thursday of Art Basel Week, the first public day to kick off our conversation series. This is a program that's been going now since 2004. We've had over 2,000 participants globally. It's pretty extraordinary. This week we welcome 50 different speakers and 12 panels from today through Saturday. We have a new conversations curator this year. Unfortunately, couldn't be here due to a family emergency. Ed Winkleman's a close friend, wonderful longstanding gallerist in New York, author, writer. He's put together an extraordinary program this week, so I wanted to send a thank you to Ed and kick this off. There's a lot of different topics that will get covered this week. We have talks on the ethics of museum funding later today, reflections on the legacies of Stonewall and legendary performance artist Carolee Schneemann, up to the moment conversation on art and social media. There's an extraordinary group of different speakers, David Wallace Wells and Antoine Sargent, two different writers, museum directors, Axel Ruger from the RA in London, Mary Cerruti at the Walker, our own Magali Arreola, who's the director of the Museo Tamayo in Mexico City, curated our new Meridian sector this year. Artists Judith Bernstein, Nicole Eisenman, collectors Anita Zabludovic, Dennis Scholl, and many others. Just so you're aware, all talks are free and open to the public. They're all recorded and available on our YouTube channel. A number of them will be also streamed live. So we're here this morning for the famous Artist Influencers talk. This is the Hans Ulrich special. He's been doing this with us for many years. This year he approached Precious Okoyomon and asked her to nominate an artist, in which case she's put forward Rirkrit Tiravanija as somebody that she wanted to be in conversation with. Precious is an artist, a poet. She has a new book coming out next year. I think Rirkrit doesn't need an introduction. We all know Rirkrit, the legend. For me, this is a special moment as well. The first time I actually came to Art Basel about 15 years ago was with Hans. I was working with him at the Serpentine at the time, and we had edited a book. So my first Art Basel experience actually was on stage here with Hans to do a book launch. So it's very special. We're all in blue today. I'll hand over to Hans. But thank you so much. This is the intellectual fabric of our fair. It makes sense. It adds context and meaning to what you see in the halls. So thank you so much for showing up on a beautiful day. And thanks everybody on stage, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you so much, Noah. Thank you all for being here, and of course, thanks so much to Precious and to Rirkrit. And before we start, please give another very warm welcome to Precious and Rirkrit. It's my great pleasure to be here for this ongoing panel, and we're gonna speak today about influence, also about the theme of generosity. This is not only going to be a panel, it's also going to be a poetry reading. We need more poetry in the world. Poetry is urgent. I wanted to thank also Mark Spiegler, because it's an extraordinary experience that these panels can evolve over many years. We started initially with the future of the museum and looked at panels with the museum on our continents, and then did a whole series of panels where artists assume different roles. The artist as an urbanist, an activist, a farmer, a choreographer, and then moved on actually to this idea of the influence. So the whole idea where an artist would talk to an artist of a different generation. This included, for example, Katharina Grosse talking with Sarah Say, or Christo actually last year here with Thomas Sarrazeno, or more recently in Basel, Dora Budor talking to Jacques Herzog and Beatrice Colomina, or of course also the panel with Dominique Gonzalez-Förster and Ange Leccia, or Glenn Ligon and Jason Moran. So it's an ongoing series. We're very grateful to Ed Winkelmann and to Toby Skagg and the amazing team here at Art Basel Miami. Now, at the end of the panel, we'll have a book launch with Art Book, where Rirkrit will sign a new book, the Bastard Cookbook, and Precious will talk about the poetry books. We are still waiting for the books, and if the books arrive, we'll sign the books. Otherwise, we'll come up with a new form of virtual book signing. It will be a new medium. But we thought before I say more that poetry is very urgent, as Claude Agile always says, who is here. We're also very grateful to Claude for actually helping prepare this panel, as well as also to Adele Köchling. Very special thanks go to Adele Köchling from Basel. But before now saying more, I just thought, let's start with poetry. And I'm so delighted that both Precious and Rirkrit brought us new, unpublished poetry.
Well, anything I write is unpublished, so. You want to? Should I go first? Okay, so the other night I was watching this documentary film on, actually, not so much about Leonard Cohen, but more about his love for this woman that he was with in Hydra. And just after I watched that, I just like kind of went into this kind of, I had to write something, and then I wrote it, and it's not finished, so I'll just, It didn't seem that long ago when living was real, and days passed us by, when the sun rose and the moon set into the blue night sky. You were there in the dark lit night, saying things I only dreamt. You were there, drawing pictures into the Milky Ways. It was not that long ago when life was more real than the fiction men and women wrote, which occupied the pictures of our world. The realness is a dream we never thought possible when a new century arrived and ushered her into the closet of our imagination. So I think there'll be more coming after. But
So I've been writing these poems to the sky called Sky Songs. So I'll read you one. Gotta find it first. Sky Song. Somewhere I read you long to dispossess yourself of yourself, slowly adjust to the suffering in this shit again. The other day, watching the sky drowning in blue as I laid in the grass, I shouted a Dumas poem to the sky. Take the blood up from the grass, sun, take it up. These people do not thirst for it. Take the insect children that play in the grass, sun, take them away. These people are sick of them. Take down the long, slender reeds, sun, cut them down. These people cannot make flutes any longer. Now, sun, come closer to the earth, even closer than that. Closer now, sun. Take away the shape from the metal, sun. These people are like stone. Now, make them lava. I like there to be a space in between us, but also a crushing, a pounding. I mean, this fullness of this articulation, I mean, no, but yes, but motherfuckers are always asking too many questions. This dispossession of that individuality held in all of that already, always already given into the unconscious, in the having given itself away, it never was. But what if it's not about putting shit together, but how shit falls apart? Shit. Open that void wide up, eating ass for breakfast. I keep getting off. Open up, get in, shit slinger, master cleanse. Silly boy, faggot, fuck the sun, son fucker. The rationality of this decolonization, the brutalizing interplay of the sensuality, refame, fade up, a dark empty room only lit by evening light, a window set high in a back wall, no color, no percussion, footsteps the only sound. Don't cry, baby. Dry your pretty eyes and smile at me. It's space-time itself. Ever since I woke up this morning, I've had so many horrible thoughts. I've thought about people who I agree on 99% of what they say and who I share 99% of the desires. I've lost count. That's bad. I really want to work on that. I really want to work on being a better person, but I can't do it by myself or in my head. It's the interpersonal diorama. Maybe you can't separate it. Maybe it's inside and outside and non-externalizable, a war of our own correlative device. Images wash into view. We comically fall off a cliff, now come into everyday life. Now double that into open space, the performative enactment of our always already being, singing Hosanna into the ear of anarchist bliss, furiously falling into waterfalls, mysterious, mischievous. And the other day, lying in green, watching the everyday sky go from pitch to violet to pink, it settles. Thanks.
Thank you so much. And I'm so glad that this is just the beginning. We're going to hear more unpublished poetry from Precious and Rirkrit later in the talk. Now, before we actually start the panel, I wanted to say that not only is this a poetry reading, a panel, and a book signing, it's also a memorial. We are here to remember Harry. Harry, the extraordinary Harry. And I don't know where the images are. We have images somewhere of Harry. And Rirkrit, I wanted to ask you to tell us a little bit about our friend Harry. We did a panel with Harry, a do-it panel at MoMA PS1, which is unforgettable to me.
Huh. Well, I mean, some people know Harry, but Harry, yes, is Harry. I mean, he's been around. He was there for like 11 years, and anyway, so he passed away like last spring, basically, and he was like the last, of his litter, and nobody wanted him. And that's nice. I haven't seen any of those pictures, so so he's kind of like somehow was a spirit guide, I think, for myself, but then also like a lot of people. He bit a lot of people towards the end of his life. Most of my students were bitten by him. Monica was bitten. But apparently it was part of the symptom of his, like he had a brain tumor, and they were saying that's part of the symptom, which we didn't realize. So, but anyway, yeah. But I think he touched a lot of people, which was kind of interesting. And yeah. So there's Harry. Though I must say I haven't written a poem about Harry yet. So maybe I'll do that.
But you've written
after.
a text about Harry. There's a long text.
Yeah.
By email. Yeah. Can you tell us about that text? It's it's a biography.
Well, Hans and Precious were talking in London, and then Hans was asking me about like doing a talk about Harry, and so I sent Hans a long biography of Harry's life. Yeah. Which I thought you were going to read.
And of course, it was the panel we did with Precious. It was in London at the Serpentine, and then also at the Gati Foundation, and it was with Rainbow. So maybe it's the moment to talk about Rainbow, Precious.
Rainbow is my toy poodle. He's really, really cute. If you find me after, I will show you a picture of him. He's kind of like an angel and a dog. He's always really calm and has this weird energy around him that makes everybody fall in love with him. I wish he was here, but he was tired and didn't want to get on a plane, which is understandable. But he's really special and my best friend.
Yeah.
Harry will be with us for the whole duration of the panel. So Rirkrit sent more than 100 images of Harry. So It's very exciting. This is still the prelude to the panel. It's still the prelude. I wanted to also say how excited I am that one of our key protagonists of the influencer panel is here. Please give a very warm welcome to Arthur Jafa, who is here this morning, who of course spoke here with Jason Moran as part of the panel here two years ago. I want to talk now about the topic actually of today, about this idea of influence, but also how your two works connect. And then we decided that we wanted to address the theme of generosity, which is an urgent theme for our time. And it's interesting because we had a panel here actually with Claudia Rankin and Glenn Ligon as part of this influencer panel, and at that time talked a lot about maybe also, non-genealogical, is that the word in English? Sort of anti-genealogy, as Deleuze-Guattari would say. Sort of to kind of consider the rhizome as a model of generous potential and growth. And that's, of course, the idea of Deleuze-Guattari. So if you look at the rhizome in its multiplicity of ideas, it's interconnected, it's self-replicating, not having a beginning nor an end, but functioning as a plateau, we can compare it to new thinking and concept of influence. And influence does not have a start or an endpoint. It's never as singular as merely linear, but multiple in the various forms it can take. And influence can be considered as part of a rhizome of ideas that allows for other ideas to grow without a hierarchy. It can therefore be seen as a non-hierarchical approach to the concept of influence. An influence based on an exchange of ideas of reciprocal growth. And I thought that's kind of nice in terms of how your works relate, and I also know, Precious, that you are very fascinated by both Deleuze-Guattari and Rirkrit, so I wanted to ask you to tell us a little bit about why you proposed Rirkrit for this panel and what inspires you about Rirkrit's work.
Well, I feel like I like the way that you envision new worlds of being through like food and community, and like how that can like help us shape new ideas of like the thing that we want to move forward to. And there's such beauty in like using something as simple as like food that's like so complex that we think about every day in like small meaningful ways, but then when you like put it in this context of like art, it like opens up new possibility. I'm obsessed with it.
Yeah.
I realized also that you're both doing these meals. I kind of wanted to ask you, Rirkrit, in terms of your influence, because when we met at the very beginning of the 90s, I always remember our very first conversation kind of circled around Gordon Matta Clark and food from the early 70s. And we spoke about Daniel Spörri, who, of course, had created a kind of whole movement about, food art and eat art, actually, and generosity. Can you tell us a little bit about these inspirations for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's. I guess it's really simple, because I would start in a way like in the sense that I went to school, and then I had to make, to survive, I had to cook and eat, right? And of course, it's always cheaper to make your own meal. And then I realized I was making always like a very big pot of curry, and then I would go, so then I should invite all the people that I know to come and eat, because I have too much food, and I couldn't eat it all. So it's like really simple like that. But then when you look into the kind of like the history of art and things, then you realize that, for me, like I think the relationship of like taking art to like life is very important, and I would say and in a way I would like to kind of keep it at that simplicity, like to kind of so in a way almost to the point where I'm not really having to do anything, right? Because in that way I just have to live, and it's what it is, right? So. But yeah, so I think there are like markers that I'm interested in, and in a way that, and in a way also to use them, the way I do is to try to like not make it art, because everyone was like trying to make art, or maybe they were not trying to make art, but everything gets co-opted into becoming art. So I'm trying very hard to not make art in that way.
I remember also in terms of generosity that we met the same week in New York when I also met Felix Gonzalez Torres for the first time, and both these conversations with you and Felix circled around this idea that one could invent other circuits of art, which would kind of be outside exhibition spaces. We then started with this show, Take Me, I'm Yours, where basically visitors can take all the objects away, where you also participated. And can you tell us a little bit about this idea of different circuits, dissemination?
No, I mean, I think it's interesting to sit here and say things like that, right? Because there's a whole hall of art inside. And, no, I'm just kind of always more interested on the, outside, like look out the window and trying to find a way to be, or to make things address the outside, So in a way, as an artist, I wake up every day thinking, how can I get out? How can I get out of here? How can I get out of this place? That is, what everyone is somehow here for or interested in. And I mean, I'm still working on it. I don't really have the answer. And maybe it's good not to have the answer, because then you have to keep working at it.
Precious, can you tell us about how you came to your meals and how they work?
So I have this kind of like collective with my friends called Spiral Theory Test Kitchen, and it kind of started like weirdly on accident. Of people would come over to my house and I would cook all these like grand elaborate meals for like hours, and then like all my friends would come over and eat, and a meal is never that simple for me. It kind of feels like a poem where it's like a bunch of things come together and it makes this like explosive thing, and then I realized it was something else in a different type of way. And so we just started making these we'd do these like rogue dinners kind of. We would like go somewhere and make a meal for whoever wanted to eat it. And it would always be something crazy, like songbirds, like wrapped in bondage, like things with like 10 different peppers, and it's kind of this tradition from my mom. Like my mom has this whole thing, like, because I grew up in Nigeria, and every single night growing up, it would always be like everyone was always over at our house having dinner, and there was like never not a night that like people were not at our house. Like my mom would spend all day cooking. Like we would go to the market, and then we would come home, and I would help her like cook, like prepare things, and then like all of my aunts would come over, and we would have this like 4-hour long dinner. And then like kind of in a way, that's what my life has transformed into now, which is I think kind of like my like praxis of care work, which I think is like a big like cosmology in my life. Is like I love to feed other people, and I love to care for them in like these small ways that they can't care for themselves. And it's especially hard in like a place like New York, where people forget to like eat 3 times a day or something. So it's like it feels like radical care work for me to make these like long, painstaking dinners for people, and then be like, yeah, now everyone has to feed each other with their hands. So it started kind of like an accidental miracle, and now I like am obsessed with making like crazy meals for people that don't know what they're putting in their mouth, essentially.
And when artists do meals, sometimes it then leads to cookbooks. I've just been rereading this amazing Dimaxion cookbook, which Buckminster Fuller did with his friends. So it's kind of like futuristic cooking. And Rirkrit, you've just published with Anto Mellasniemi from Finland a Basel cookbook. Can you tell us about how that cookbook works? And does it connect to that idea of care? Precious was mentioning?
Just listening to you talk about it, it's kind of like bastard cooking in that way. But I would say like Bastard Cookbook is not really a book you could actually follow the recipe and cook. I mean, it's about like attitude, right? So it's actually about like how you approach things and how you can improvise. And the idea is to understand like what is behind you, in a sense, understand like the recipe or the histories of things, and or different ideas of what you know, right? And then in a way to be open to improvising things you don't know. So it's really about an attitude of like throwing things together, and in that way, so it becomes bastardized, right? So it becomes something that you don't know, or it's a mix of things you know. So it's a book. I would say it's not a cookbook. It's a book about like how to find a way to like put things together. So we say very strongly in the book, like, don't follow the recipe, just bastardize everything.
Now, Precious, when I asked you about your unrealized project, we did a talk at DLD in Munich. You told me, and this is a quote from this previous conversation, my unrealized project is this community that's a sustainable installation of future world building. This queer space of people I love, and together we live and we work on building what we see as the new world. I don't believe you build a new world, you just point towards it and you move to it, and that's what I want to do. I want to create this small world. End of quote. So I wanted to ask you about this future world building and in a way how you imagine your future world and what kind of generosity would represent in it.
Kind of this like future world to me feels like it's like, how do you get to a space, how do you like time travel to a space that you want to be in? And you have to do that through like actually creating time with other people, and like build like what that like actually means, like actual like lived space together, and kind of like this idea of like bloodshed of like, oh, I have to like literally give parts of myself to other people freely, and like together we can weave a new type of like cosmology together, and that takes like lived work. And for me that means like, what does it mean to like build something with people that you love and care about? You have to like create a whole new space of thinking about like, what is time, what even is the world as the world, because you're like, I don't even know like what this like, because I mean like for me I'm like, oh, this world is like truly dying and like falling apart, or this like idea of the world. So it's like, oh, I want this whole new different thing of like limitless space and time and like queer futurities, which means like we don't even know what we want to imagine. We just want to like go there and presently live in it constantly and be entangled in new rebirths of self that have no like endless limits. Yeah.
Thank you. And of course, that idea, of the future brings us back to Rirkrit, who often says that the future will be chrome. And that, of course, brings us also to something I recently read. You said it in Bomb magazine, a quote from Rirkrit. I would like to think of architecture as a place and how that place works in the expanse of time. So it has to do with, I think, what Precious talked about, this limitlessness, of space and time. Continuing here your quote, I would like people to be able to find details or to pay attention as an idea of spending time or being in time. I'm interested in finding a way to make kinds of attention or certain layers of attention that will make a person have to spend time or at least think about the experience in that way. So I wanted to ask you to tell us a little bit about that and about the future will be chrome, the link to architecture, and also how that kind of connects to generosity.
Well, it's no. I mean, I think like if you give time, then you're already, being. I mean, especially today, it seems like everybody, is on a different. I mean, the approach to time and space is very different. So if you stop everything, that's already kind of being generous to, give attention to that. I mean, I think for me, it's trying to find a space where you could work and do things, maybe always in opposition actually to everything else, which is to say, I would like to do something that is about not what everyone is thinking about, because maybe people are not thinking about it. So I would like to find a way to stand outside and and then maybe people will look out the window and say, "Oh, there's a guy who's not in here," you know. So yeah, and I think it's and actually, I mean, interestingly, I think art is one of those spaces, right, where you can actually stand outside and do that, and people will actually pay attention or give attention. So, I'm hoping that I will just stay out there and that everyone will still look out the window and pay attention. Because there is something about that we need to always remember and to look outside of ourselves, to look to the edge of things, to look at the pile of garbage that we are not, giving any attention to, and to find that it is actually part of our experience that we are living with, and then to actually give it space, not reject it, to give meaning and to give attention and time to the difference that we have, right? Which is something we are not giving now, or people are trying to, take that away. So in that way, I want to stay out there.
You also said in a conversation we had earlier this year that sharing and this idea of sharing could be at this moment in time a kind of protest. And I saw some of your protest drawings. Yes, that made me think of that. I wanted to ask you about that quote. How can sharing be a protest?
Well, I mean, I think again, it's about like giving time, So really, for everyone to be sitting there listening to what I have to say is a kind of, they're giving the time to be here together, and I hope everyone like feels, how everyone is with each other, next to each other, and and then giving that time away from the other thing, which is in there, the big thing, which is has a lot to do with other things that I don't want to talk about, but it's there, right? So the economy of art and things like that. So I think it would be great to be able to find a way to share and spend time together without having to think about the economy of it, right? And to be able to be free to give that time and space. That you don't have to make anything out of it. That we're just together. So maybe that is a kind of protest against everything else,
Precious, what would you say about this idea that sharing can be a kind of protest?
I mean, I feel like the whole like system of like capital is based upon like not sharing, and this idea of like ownership of like your own self as being like yourself, like which is him like, wait, what does that mean to like not blur into other people and be in this constant like evolving of like, oh, I share my energy with you, I share my time with you, and there is no like there's like it's that whole thing like Fred's always like, I don't consent to being a single being, and I'm like, yeah, that's the whole thing. Like, why wouldn't you want to like, it's like actually radical to share. I'm like, of course, like if you're not sharing, then you're just like isolated by yourself as this like thing, and then you don't grow, or you just like the early death thing. It's like you have to share so you can keep growing and learning and blur and merge into other people, so you can like become the like thing, the expansive like light force. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, let me just, I think also, like, I think it's, for me, it's about, like, it's not about having to make anything out of it. So I could just give without having to expect anything out of it, in that sense that, so I can just give my space or my time or my presence or just give myself anyway without having to think about it being anything, right? So I can stand here in the middle of the crowd and, and that's already, a lot in a way, to be able to like not have to make anything out of it, right? So I think it's important to for me personally to like, you know, I mean, just be there and give whatever I have, even if I don't do anything, you know. But it's more about the attitude, right? That I'm not taking, I'm just giving, right? I would like to just give. And maybe that's, and I mean, and in a way, I think we grow up in communities that are doing that without having to think about it. So we have grandmothers and mothers who cook for everyone. We have, you know, friends and strangers who are like family. But that's because we grew up that way. You know, we came out of this kind of environment that is, you know, everybody gives, or everybody is just present in that sense. So, you know, so yeah, so it's interesting to be in a position where just being here is like giving or sharing and not having to make anything out of it, really.
That brings us back really to the Sky Song, Precious, the great poem in an earlier kind of incarnation of the Sky Song, which you once read. You said no to the ego. This is kind of important, and that, of course, is somehow the idea also that there is no singular artist, as you said. That's impossible. So it's the rejection of singular identities and singular creative ownership, in a way, in favor of multiplicities of identity. And that brings us, of course, also to collaboration. Can you talk a little bit about the no to the ego?
I feel like I've always been kind of like into playing with other people, like, and this idea of kind of like we should always be intertwined. So even when I was like, oh, I'm gonna like make objects now, it became this thing of like, oh, I want to make objects with people I love to create like portals into like new ideas of like world being, and it's just this thing of like, I don't see myself as being this like isolated thing. It's like I need my friends to help me like make this thing I want to see in the world, and we need to be together to do it so it can like fully spiral in the like way to make the like beautiful thing open. It's like, oh, there is no kind of like isolated, I'm gonna do this on my own and I like am like just me here doing this like thing and I will make the like, that's impossible, because it's like, what does that look like? That's just like you by yourself, like, and then you're just alone again.
Playing with other people, Rirkrit, can you talk about that? That's also important for you, no?
Yeah, I cook with other people. So, but I mean, I think I mean, I think you have to make space for other people, and then other people make space for you in that sense. So, yeah, I mean, I think everything I do is with other people, you know, with a lot of people, and so it's not even, it's a kind of it's a kind of a way of you know, yeah, I mean, maybe it's a way of existing, which is what I was, I mean, saying about like we grow up in a place where you work and be and do with a lot of people, so it's kind of like natural for me. I mean, I like to say, you know, I'm just doing what is really normal. There's nothing special about what I do, and you know, and I'm just, yeah, just, you know, doing it. Right? But also, like, I think one has to also acknowledge, you know, that there are all these people, right? That you are always working with other people, and I think it's important for everyone to know that you know, that we're all doing it together always. You know, you sitting over there is doing this, we're doing here. You know, so you know, so I think it's just kind of like, yeah, it's about the energy that we all give to each other. I started to talk like at some point about breathing, right? So, like, we all have to breathe, and we're sharing the same air, and we breathe together. You know, maybe we don't, and at some point, maybe it'd be good to breathe together. You know, like same breath, and you know, but it's about like thinking about that, like being conscious about that, right?
And it has also to do with healing, I suppose. And I wanted to ask you both about that. Earlier this year, we did an exhibition of Emma Kunz at the Serpentine. And she was the first artist I ever came across as a child, because, growing up in Switzerland, when I was like 4 or 5 years old, my mother would always buy this powder, so a healing powder from a stone, which you can buy in every Swiss pharmacy of Emma Kunz. And she was an extraordinary healer, but also artist. She made these visionary geometric drawings. It's almost like somehow connected to Hilma af Klint, who of course is now so known in the US after the show at the Guggenheim, whom we also showed at the Serpentine, who also found these amazing geometric drawings, these cosmological drawings more than geometric. It's a cosmology, it's a world building, to come back to that, what Precious said. And Emma made these world building drawings and never really considered them to be art. She did them as part of the healing process and then made them to actually also go on the cover of this medicine, of this powder. She discovered the healing quality of a stone, and you can still buy this in every pharmacy in Switzerland today. And of course, these drawings, were the first artworks I saw somehow as a child. So when we did the exhibition at the Serpentine, we talked, of course, about this idea of art and healing. And Rirkrit, you've spoken to me previously about the medicinal aspects of art, also of certain foods, of tea also, the medicinal aspect of tea. And you've just done this extraordinary piece actually in Singapore, which has to do with that. Can you maybe talk a little bit? It would be great to hear you both about this theme.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think, I think earlier on, I always thought, I think like all kinds of everything we, consume, and many things we consume, we are not conscious about like how it has an effect on ourselves, in that way. And I think, of course, it would be good to make things that people consume, and somehow it would cure them from all the ills, which is like everything around us at the moment. But yeah, so I think that, again, like that's something that art could probably is a space where you can use to make cures for things outside of ourselves. But then, that's the brain, right? That's the mind. So how do you, I think like part of my interest in curing and doing things like that is to cure like let's say to cure the difference. Let's say it's about like kind of to give you something that will cure your fear, so when you're not afraid, you won't get sick. Because we're always getting afraid of being sick. And in a way, I think and that has to do with like the fact that we're maybe not looking and understanding ourselves enough. So you're always afraid, When you don't know yourself enough, you're always afraid of the thing that you don't know. And so hopefully, the curry I make is going to make you realize that, there is the self. And in that self, you are able to sustain, without having to be afraid.
So fear eats the soul, and I wanted to ask Precious to tell us about curing the fear.
Kind of like I have this thing where I'm like, fear is the thing that kind of like kills us. So a lot of like at the dinners we do this thing where one of our biggest rules is that you're never allowed to feed yourself, which for me is like a huge thing because like in a lot of like Nigerian cooking, like you eat with your hands, and it's kind of based in like feeding other people literally. So I always think that's like one of the biggest things to me is like how to self-fragilize in that type of way of remembering that like you can care for other people in small ways, as even doing something as like let me feed you, with people like really never do for other people. Like you do it for like kids, you're like, oh, I'm gonna feed this little baby, but then like for an adult to feed another adult is like a huge thing, because you're like, oh, this is like me kind of like allowing myself to have this vulnerable moment with somebody else, which I think is like one of those like the biggest thing we need to do is kind of like self-fragilize ourselves to remember like we can care for other people, and also that teaches us how to receive care for ourselves. And that like then does that thing of doing the melting again where we blur, and then you're like back to the thing where you're not afraid of the other because you can like not only see yourself in them, but you understand that there is like this interconnected entanglement in everybody that we constantly are forgetting that we have. Like everyone in this room right now is like connectively entangled, and we've like split something into each other that like sometimes you forget, like, but by like constantly stepping in every room with somebody, you're like, you have a piece of me. Yeah.
Now, fear eats the soul is also the title, Rirkrit, of a very big exhibition, of a project at the Glenstone Museum. And you once told me that basically we should reflect on the possibilities about extending the practice, outside. Is this mine?
That's my alarm to move my car across the street in New York.
So I'm very glad because we've entered somehow a linearity, and before we continue this linearity, I think the alarm is a sign, Rirkrit, that we should have more poetry. So this is a great moment, and please give a big round of applause for Precious and Rirkrit. This is end of part number 1 of the panel, and we now have the second poetry reading, unpublished poetry by Rirkrit Tiravanija and by Precious Okoyomon. Maybe Precious, you start this time.
Oh, wow. Poetry.
Wait, I thought you were making a point. I was like kind of following that.
Okay. I have this book, it's called But Did You Die? And this is like the this is the kind of basis of it. It's called But Did You Die? I remember how you touched my hand and the sadness left. I remember the sky being so blue, it turned the bird blue and leaked into me. I remember hitting that bird with my car and pulling over and crying because birds with one wing can still fly. I remember too much AC4O DMT led to radical vulnerability, led to nosebleeds on the J train, led to laying in the grass shouting, I am here, I am still here, motherfuckers. I remember the world ending and starting again and nobody noticed. I remember having nothing to fear, then remembering whiteness. I remember the way your hair smelled like spring and that rested me. I remember rolling down the hill and crushing all the orchids. I remember the soft wind kissing my cheek. I remember the death of the empire came and nobody noticed. I remember the yellow flowers opening portals to that Alicia Crampton song about waterfalls. I remember the bird wing I carried around in my pocket for weeks until we buried it in my mother's backyard. I remember the world trying to kill me and shining like a drop of sun. I remember the daybreak and the collapse and the sacred air. I remember that time you shit yourself in my living room and we laughed because God is good and fuck the haters. I remember merging my body with the sky and then nothing at all but the sky and the world standing still and the flowers and the trees kissing each other slowly and the birds and nothing but us and the world being trapped with each other in the world.
My phone died, and then I have a new phone. And it seems like I've lost a lot of things on it, but I found this, and I don't remember writing it, but here we go. Fuck the sentimentality of distance. Fuck the sentimentality of time and space. When love is love and time makes for the gap between Antarctica and the Arctic Circle. Greenland was the place between Iceland and Newfoundland, where they would say, fuck the sentimentality of time and space. Fuck the sentimentality of hopelessness, hopelessly loving. Fuck the sentimentality of nationalism, proto-fascism, and fear of otherness. Fuck them.
Now, about 10 years ago, I visited you in Berlin, Rirkrit, and you suggested that we go on. It's a beautiful thing to do in summer in Berlin, to go on a little rowboat on a lake outside Berlin. So we went together, and you said I should bring something to write. The idea would be that we would write some poetry on the rowboat. So I thought I would bring a typewriter, not a computer, but a typewriter. And we had a book by Jackson McClough from the Something Else Press. And then you were basically dictating poetry, and I was typing it on the typewriter whilst we were on the rowing boat. Can you tell us about that series?
Well, I guess it's our ongoing poetry collaboration. But we published one, right? So we did. But no, again, I think it's. So I'm teaching students at Columbia University, and what I find often, right, these days, so they would come to the class, whatever, the kitchen, and they would say to me, "Oh, we just saw a really great show," and I would ask them, "So who's the artist?" And they would say, "Oh, we don't remember." And then I say to them, "So describe me the work," because of course, if you describe me the work, I could put it together, who the artist would be, and they couldn't describe me the work, And so I said, okay, well, I'm not going to teach them how to make anything. I'm going to teach them how to tell me like what they're looking at, right? And so today, in a way, like actually tomorrow, I'm flying back tonight, and tomorrow I'm asking them to come to class and for a final project, and they have to basically write and tell a story or poetry or whatever modes of words they can to tell me what it is that the work that they want to do is, right? And it has, I think it's like we're forgetting how to describe things. We're forgetting how to explain what things are, because everything is being explained to us. Everything, just Google everything and you can explain everything away. And so, so I find words now very important, even though it's not the words I have. I'm not very good, with words or anything like that. But on the other hand, I feel like, and that has to do with, looking at the periphery, looking at the garbage, and be able to say, yeah, there's a mess of a tangled wire behind this like funny speaker over there that nobody's paying attention to, and the man who's like filming this talk is like texting his friend who is out there somewhere, and there's a lady with her shoes off sitting with her feet on the chair, but we need to pay attention to things like that because that's what we're living in, and that's where I find the beauty of life, right? So I think it's important to try to put things into words and to leave words behind and to have stories left behind and to have memory of those things.
And that leads us really to one of the most extraordinary experiences ever I've had as a curator. It's when I was working at the Musée d'Art Moderne de la Ville de Paris in France in the early 2000s, and the museum closed, and so we had a temporary building in the Couvent des Cordeliers, the convent, very important site of the French Revolution, and we invited you, Rirkrit, to do a retrospective. And in a way, it's a show which I think would be great to hear about from you, because it has exactly to do with that. Because you have to imagine an exhibition where there was not one single work, yet there were all the works, but they were there through words. Can you tell us about how that show worked?
I hate to describe my work, so...
Yeah, I never asked you, but in that show, it's the only way we can talk about it, because it's difficult to show photos.
Yeah. Okay, so gotta walk it back a little bit. So many years ago, I went many years ago, I went to Los Angeles to do a show with a friend, and then we were, asked to go and give a talk at the Pasadena school. I can't remember, Art Center, and so my friend Lincoln came with his slides, and this was when we had slides. And of course, I never carried any slides. I never have any pictures. So we went together, and then there was a class sitting like this, and Lincoln showed his slides, described his work. I had no slides, so I just flash on this light projection, right, from the machine. And then I start to describe the image that I remember of what my slides would be, which is the work, right? So I start to say, you know, there's a pedestal, it's white. On top of the pedestal, there is a coiled, electrical burner. On top of that sits a porcelain pot. Inside the pot, there's a bubbling kind of coconut milk curry thing. And then, and then splashing onto the pedestal are little bubbles of, the coconut milk, and then the smell. So I started to describe every slide, and then I had to do this retrospective in Paris, and I thought, well, actually, I'm still thinking about it, but it's impossible to, in a way, remake the work as an experience, outside of its context, outside of everything else. So the best way would be to just describe it to people, right? To just tell them the story of the thing, describe it to them, and then tell them the story of what they're looking at. So basically, you just have an empty room, and then you just have very good docents who come and tell you exactly what you're looking at. So people would walk into an empty space, and the docent would say, here you have a white pedestal, and on top of the pedestal is an electric, So, and this was a retrospective, so it's 15 years of work, So people are walking around this empty space, there's nothing in it, being told what they're looking at. But I think what's interesting about that is the fact that, when I say, it's a electrical coil, burner, everybody has an image of it in their own mind. So I'm sure, I see a green thing, and somebody else sees a red thing, and so everybody has a very different image of what that thing is. And it has to do with the fact that they have the memory of what that thing is. And I think that, to me, is what I'm kind of now, presently, very interested in.
And Precious, you also spoke about that when we talked in Munich. We talked a lot about language in your work, and you talked about these semiotic chains, saying that there is no language in itself, nor are there any linguistic universal. There is a throng of dialects, of slangs, of patois. There's no ideal speaker, listener, no more than there is, no homogeneous linguistic community. What does it mean for you to work with language, kind of in answer to Rirkrit?
Well, to some extent, I feel like language is always failing me, even though I'm a writer, and then I have to come up with new places, because maybe it's the communication's always failing in some type of way, so it's trying to find new ways to blossom it. So I'm always how do I say this thing I can't say, which is always in new forms of sometimes I have days where I'm I can't even talk correctly, and I will draw sometimes, or I'm really into this new form of communication I have, which is just drawing little pictures for people and giving it to them. And I'm oh, I lost my words this day, and this is what you get. It's, for me, it's constantly in the ways that I fail, and discovering ways that the language is always slipping out of me, into finding new ways of discovering it. So it's always kind of new modes of challenges.
Before we open it up to all your questions or comments, maybe one or two, because that could almost be a conclusion, I think. But I have one or two last questions. I thought it would be interesting because we talked about exhibitions, we talked about poetry, we talked about books. We're going to have a book launch in a minute here, and a book signing. And we haven't talked about the internet. And the other day I spoke to Tim Berners-Lee, who invented the World Wide Web in 1989. It was March 1989, so it's a little bit more than 30 years ago. He came for a talk to the Serpentine in London. And he was really, really upset about what's happening to his invention because of that whole theme actually of generosity, because he said this is for everyone. He had invented the World Wide Web to be something for everyone, which is also why at the moment of the Olympic ceremony, when London did the Olympic Games, Tim Berners-Lee was part as the inventor of the World Wide Web that ceremony, and he had the famous sentence, this is for everyone. And he feels that that's somehow endangered because we have a fast internet, more and more for people who pay, and a much slower internet for people who don't pay. So I just wanted to just ask you to maybe talk a little bit about that, because Precious, you said when we spoke at DLD that there is no difference between us and the internet. The internet is a holding for human decay and how we experience things, and that language is our everyday. There is no separation from that. I think that is the problem, thinking that there is a separation when language should meld into everything we use. I thought it would kind of connect in an interesting way to what you both just said about language. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I feel like constantly we're like, once again, failing in new, different, beautiful ways. And then like we have this like force, like internet, which like helps us like hold our memories and like help us like kind of like find anything we need and like find new ways of like communicating and like entangling with each other, like finding each other really. So I'm like, for me, I like started kind of like in this poetry thing where I would like text my friends a lot, like all of these like grand poems. And like, I grew up kind of in the age of like MySpace. So I kind of remember like writing these like long MySpace blog like poems, like in what, I was like 13 or something. And like even before that, I had this like moment, like when I was like younger, I was like 6 or something, I stopped talking for a year and I would like write these poems and put them in a tree. And that was like my form of the internet. Like early internet was just me like digging holes and like putting my poems in them and hoping they would like leak into the earth somehow. And I'm like, that's kind of like the same thing as like we have this like force that allows us to like kind of entangle with like everyone in this like really special, beautiful way. And I think it's like we have to stop thinking it's like just for us, because it's like for everybody. Yeah, I love the internet like so much.
Rirkrit, do you love the internet?
Well, I'm from the last century, so I have this quote way back that I would say, and when the internet came out, I said, I'd rather go down to the bar and meet my friend and have a drink and, tell them what I think than to sit at home alone. So I don't, but it's interesting. I always think the young people I deal with, that it's part of their language, right? But I think maybe what would be interesting is that it should be better, to use it differently or to use it better. So I always try to get them to make things on this kinds of, how would you say it? Like this kinds of tools, right? In that way. But but it's not. I'm totally into the ASMR thing.
I love ASMR videos.
And I'm going to try to make it into like a, how do you call it, the VR, right? I'm gonna go meet these people and make it into VR. I'm gonna make very big business. Everybody's gonna be using it at home. But but again, I like it because it's about like sensory thing, and how people speak like this very softly, and then you have to pay attention and go to sleep.
Have you seen the eating ones?
But they're tools, and I think they're tools that we should use and not be a victim of it, right?
Very last question. As you both know, it's the only recurrent question in all my conversations and panels the question about the unrealized project. We know a great deal about architects' unrealized projects because they publish them all the time, and very often, through publishing them, reality then gets built. But we know fairly little about artists' unrealized projects, poets' unrealized projects, as a matter of fact. And there's, of course, many different reasons why a project is unrealized. Some projects are too expensive to be realized. Some projects are too big to be realized. Sometimes a project can also be too small to be realized. Our friend Sildo Meirelles from Brazil always wanted to do a project where a tiny little cube would be exhibited in a museum and the whole rest of the museum would have to be empty. So it took him a long time, to convince a museum to do that. He finally realized it. So that project was too small to be realized. And, some projects are utopic. Rirkrit and I, with Moran, worked on an Utopia station. So we worked a lot with this idea of creating a station for Utopia. Some projects are actually censored. There is censorship is a reason why projects are unrealized. And as Doris Lessing, with whom I often spoke in London about this question of unrealized project, the late Doris Lessing always said, there is also the project we simply haven't dared to do. It's like, she would call that self-censorship. So there's a whole roster or range of unrealized projects, and I thought it would be lovely here to conclude with you both telling us about one or some of your unrealized projects. It's great also that Quinn Harrelson is here because we are working with Quinn on a series on this subject matter. Yeah, I'm very curious to hear from you about your unrealized projects.
So Hans and I have been talking for a long time, and always there's an unrealized project at the end of every talk. So I have to reinvent this unrealized project every time because, So today it's going to be, the unrealized project is to have everyone breathe together. The whole world. Breathe at the same pace together. So everyone taking the breath at the same time and exhaling at the same time. Everybody breathe in sync, the whole world together. That will be never realized.
Thank you so much. And Precious?
So my unrealized project today is I want to have an existential detective miracle foundation where you come to me with your existential problems and me and my team figure out how to solve them, which involves stalking you, taking pictures of your life, following you around, and, figuring out what you need, really. That's what I want.
Precious and Rirkrit, thank you so very much. Thank you. And before we now do the art book signing next door here, we have time for 2 or 3 of your urgent questions. Do we have questions for Precious or Rirkrit? We've got a question here in the last row.
Yeah, Rirkrit, about this breath altogether. Maybe it gets realized step by step. Maybe we should start here, first in this room, and then expanding it. What do you think?
Let's do it. No?
Can you do that? Advise us?
Sure. Okay, first, I think one thing is that we don't breathe enough, right? We're actually breathing as if we don't even think about it, right? So, we don't breathe enough. So, one, for everyone to think about their breath, right? So, okay, I'm gonna say inhale, and everyone inhale, and then exhale, everyone exhale, right? So, I have to talk, so I'm holding my breath. Okay, so everyone together, inhale, right? Hold it, exhale. Again, inhale, exhale. Okay, so then, the thing I do, funny enough, but I always count my breath. I count my breath. So let's do it together 5 times. and then from when you're on the fifth time, we go backwards to 1, right? So 1, inhale, exhale. 2, inhale, exhale. 3, inhale, exhale. 4, inhale, exhale. 5, inhale, exhale. 4, inhale, exhale. 3, inhale, exhale. 2, inhale, exhale. 1, inhale, exhale. 0, inhale, and hold it. Exhale. Thank you. Thanks for that question.
You have a question here?
Hi. Thanks for sharing your thoughts. So this project Rirkrit wants to realize, it's being realized for the last few years. If you use the internet to search Maharishi effect, you can join that movement. It's been happening for, I think, since 2015. So my question is, in the sharing experiences you do, both Precious and Rirkrit, what have you found? Is there a common theme or common fear people have before they become vulnerable or before they share?
I think for me, in the like when I do these dinners, I think there's a usual like apprehensiveness or like kind of like uncertainty to like people feeling about like this experience of like, oh, are we like at my dinners? I usually do a thing where like I make people look each other in the eye before. That's like also another rule. Is like it's like a fragilization thing of you have to stare at people in the eye for like a minute, like a full 2 minutes or so before you can like eat your first bite. And there's usually this like there's always a general fear of being like, oh, like an uncomfortable thing of because like I sit you next to a stranger and I'm like staring into their eyes before you can eat this thing, and people are usually like, I don't know, like that makes me uncomfortable. Like I think there's like a thing with like, I think the same thing happens with feeding people where people feel a little like they have to get over the thing of being like, oh, how do I like fall into this other person? But then once they get over that, that's kind of nice. But then there's always that original fear of like the falling.
Yeah, and then and then you're surprised. Like, I mean, I was in a little village in a mountain in the south of Italy, right between Naples and Puglia, in the mountain, and I made actually, and they have their own like pasta that they make, like, you know, kinds of noodles and things. So I went and I cooked with some local people there, but so we used their local pasta. And then, but then I made curry, so I made like a curry pasta. And then we went into, I mean, it was at a school, and then everybody came, like the village people came, like 300, 400 people came. And I was like, okay, you know, this is Italy, people have really, you know, traditions, and they, you know, they don't eat, you know, cheese with fish, whatever, you know, like. And so we put it out, all the kids are there, everyone's running around, and then people start to eat. And they were like eating, like without fear, without any kind of apprehension, without any, I mean, spicy, you know, not making, you know, your kind of Western curry. I'm making like really things you know. People had no fear. They ate, they stepped up, they ate, they tried everything, they tried every curry. They had no complaints. They never said anything about like the fact that I'm doing all the pasta wrong and everything. So, so they're like the other side, which is like always unexpected. You go to a little village and everybody's so open to like whatever the stranger is doing, right? So, yeah, and then you kind of like realize actually there is like faith in humanity, that you can believe that, yes, there is also people who are not afraid,
We can take one last question. If there is no last question, I have one last question. Rainer Maria Rilke has this wonderful little book, which is an advice to a young poet. And I see, also, as always in these talks, art students here, and was wondering what both of you would give as an advice.
Should I go?
Yeah, go for it.
Stop making art. Do everything else, which can be art. Do it with, do it mindfully, do it with passion and compassion. But, it doesn't have to be, you don't have to make art to do that. You can make better than art.
I think for me, it's like care for other people, like even in the small, like weird ways you don't think is caring for other people, by being like simply present in like all your experiences with people, like just like simple everyday care work. Yeah, it's praxis.
There could not be a more wonderful conclusion. I also wanted to say the unrealized project of today's panel is we had an alternative scenario, which we then, because we promised Noah that this will not be a marathon, it would have lasted 8.5 hours. The unrealized panel of today was this amazing novel, which I all recommend to you. Patrick Powell wrote a novel called The Interrogative Mind, and it's a wonderful novel just made out of questions. And my original idea would have been to ask all these questions to Precious and Rirkrit. We're going to do this another time. I'm eternally grateful to all of you for being here so early in the morning. And please give an enormous applause to the amazing Precious and Rirkrit. Thank you so much.